In the riverside village of Suzhou, where the water flowed slow and the willows touched the surface of the canals, lived an old man named Zun. He was a weaver, known not for speed or wealth, but for the peace that lingered in his courtyard, like incense in the evening air. Zun's home was a narrow wooden house that leaned gently over a quiet stream. Its tiled roof was mossy and bowed like the back of its owner, and its walls creaked softly in the wind. There was a courtyard in the center, where a loom stood patiently beneath an awning of flowering vines. A single lantern hung from a beam, unlit during the day but always ready for dusk. Each morning, Zun would wake before the birds. He moved quietly in loose robes and soft cloth shoes, so as not to disturb the quiet he had come to love. He would boil water, pour tea, and sip slowly as steam curled into the dawn. Outside his door, the village stirred in its own rhythm, carts rolling, children running, the distant knock of a woodblock bell from a tea-seller's boat. But Zun remained, still, listening more than moving. He had once worked in the city, in a workshop filled with men who shouted over looms and coughed from the dust. But his hands had grown slower and his heart quieter until he knew he no longer belonged there. So he came back to the village where he was born and returned to the rhythm of water and thread. His weaving now was never rushed. He worked on a single roll of silk for weeks, sometimes longer, letting each thread follow the one before it without urgency. He said nothing while he worked. He never needed to. On this evening, a soft wind brushed the water. The sky had turned golden, and the lanterns began to glow in homes across the stream. Zun had finished threading his shuttle through the weft and leaned back on his stool. He looked out through the open side of the courtyard to the river. There, a small heron stood in the shallows, still balanced, its reflection just a shimmer beneath it. Zun smiled. He had once seen a heron like that when he was a boy, and his grandfather had told him, "Stillness is strength when it does not break." The memory came like a warm bowl of soup in winter, comforting, slow, full. He lit the lantern. Its glow was soft, barely brighter than the fading day. He made a bowl of congee, placed it on the low table beside the loom, and ate slowly. He used a wooden spoon, worn smooth by years of quiet meals. In the distance, a flute began to play. Someone's son, practicing. The sound was imperfect, wobbly, but sweet in its own way. The stars came out, just a few at first. They blinked above. The tiled roofs, like distant lanterns, hung by the sky itself. The moon rose, round and yellow, casting a silver trail across the stream. Zun sipped his tea again. It had grown cool, but he didn't mind. He thought of the silk he would finish next week, pale blue, like the river in morning. He thought of the woman who had commissioned it for her daughter's wedding. He remembered the look in her eyes, not rushed, not greedy, just kind, in the gentle heart of ancient Suzhou, where narrow canals ran like threads of silver through rows of willow-lined pathways. A village slumbered under a soft blanket of twilight. The breeze that flowed down, the water's surface was slow, warm, and steady, like a breath held peacefully before sleep. On one side of the riverbank, just beyond the arched stone bridge that wore the moss of many years, sat a small weaver's courtyard. It was quiet, the thatched roof, aged by decades of soft rains and summer suns, sat low and wide over the wooden. Home vines curled lazily up its walls. The doors were always half open, like the smile of someone never in a hurry. Lanterns hung from their corners, their silk coverings faded into soft gold and crimson, glowing just slightly from the last light of day. Inside the courtyard, a man moved slowly, quietly, as if his soul itself had been woven from silence. He was not old, not young. His face had seen many summers, but carried none of the weight. He wore soft robes, dyed with muted indigo, the sleeves fraying gently at the ends. His hands, marked faintly by years of threadwork, rested on a loom that had been passed down like a memory. The loom creaked gently as he moved, not in protest, but like an old friend exhaling. His days were always like this. The weaver would rise with the mist and sleep with the stars. He never measured time in minutes or hours, but in the length of thread, the rise of steam from a tea bowl, the shifting of the light on the floorboards. Now, with dusk settling in and the scent of jasmine drifting in through the bamboo shutters, he sat alone at the loom, finishing a pattern that had no deadline. Each movement was measured and effortless, like the drawing of breath. Outside, the river moved slowly. Lanterns floated on the water, left there by children and elders earlier. In the evening, each flame a whisper of memory or wish. The weaver watched them sometimes, but never touched. His thoughts were soft, his memories even softer. He lived alone, but he was not lonely. Each object in his courtyard had a place and a voice. The clay teapot on the bench remembered every conversation ever had. The thread spools remembered the hands of his grandmother. The cherrywood stool remembered the laughter of his childhood. They did not speak aloud, but in the way they waited quietly for his return. They were never silent. A kettle began to sigh quietly, like the wind through pine. He rose slowly, stepping across the stone tiles, brushing a leaf that had wandered in. He poured too long, always, and set it down beside him on a worn cloth. The steam curled upward like a story not yet told. He did not drink right away. He waited, watching it rise and vanish, lost in its movement. Time moved gently in soup. It didn't flow like water, but drifted like petals. A nearby bamboo grove rustled. A crane passed overhead, its wings silent against the dusk. Somewhere in the distance, an old lute played, faint, off-key, and beautiful. He took a sip, then he returned to the loom. There were no urgent thoughts, no future plans, no unfinished dreams. Only the now, the soft clack of wood, the rustle of thread, the occasional creak of floorboards beneath his barefoot steps. Every so often, he would step outside and sweep the path, not because it needed it, but because he liked the rhythm. He would pause by the river, watching a dragonfly skip along its mirror-like surface. He would trace a fingertip along the wooden railing, feeling the worn grain beneath his hand. He would breathe deeply, letting the cool air settle into him. Then back to the loom. The moon rose. It cast soft silver across his courtyard, turning the roof tiles into a field of shimmering lines. The shadows lengthened, but did not threaten. A dog barked far off, only once, then silence again. The night deepened, but his mind did not. He wove. Hours passed unnoticed. The fabric took form beneath his hands, soft and endless. No pattern was planned, yet it emerged. Waves and leaves and mist, all shapes the soul remembers, but the mind forgets. He worked slowly, stopping now and then to sip or close his eyes, or feel the breeze pass through. Sometimes he would sit in the garden and look up at the sky, eyes half closed, listening for the sound of geese overhead. Sometimes he would lie on the bamboo mat and stretch his back, his hands resting gently over his stomach, heart beating slow and even. Time thickened, quieted. He might recall his father's voice, but faintly. He might remember the feel of his mother's scarf, but only as the texture of silk between his fingers. These memories came not as words or visions, but as air, always around him, always soft. The stars turned. He lit a second lantern, then a third. The flames flickered gently, swaying like grass under water. He did not speak, not even to himself. There was nothing to decide, no story to tell, only the weaving, the water, the wind. The cicadas eventually fell silent. The leaves rested in stillness. Even the moon seemed to hover in place, as if reluctant to move forward. The weaver set his hands in his lap. The fabric was nearly finished. It would be left on the loom until tomorrow. There was no rush. It had waited centuries to be made. It could wait one more night. He rose once more, stretched, then stepped outside. The air smelled of river and stone and moss. He walked barefoot to the edge of the canal, sat and let his feet hang over the side. Beneath him, koi moved like living ink, their bodies gliding without sound. He stayed like that for some time, watching nothing, hearing everything. Finally, he returned inside. He folded a small blanket, laid upon the woven mat, and rested his head on the cloth pillow. The lanterns flickered, the water whispered. The threads he had woven now whispered too, soft, endless, calming, as if each strand carried the voice of the night itself, singing gently into the edges of sleep. And sleep came, not as a fall, but afloat, the weaver's breath steady, his body at peace, his spirit blending with the quiet all around. The courtyard waited, the river flowed, and all was still. End of story.